In this video, I will talk about the Chocobo Farm in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how the visuals, story, and gameplay could be presented and expanded upon. First up, the visual. Here's an interesting fact. In the original Final Fantasy VII map, the farm is approximately the size of the entire world map of Final Fantasy XV. Be sure to watch the video why the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy will not be a fully realized open world for a thorough mathematical breakdown on all of that. Will the farm really be that large in the next installment? Highly unlikely, but I think it's safe to assume that the farm will be more than just a chocobo pen, a house, and a barn. Even though that is exactly what made it into Crisis Core 3D render of the farm as seen in this footage. With the announcement of Crisis Core Remake titled Crisis Core Reunion, which is going to tie directly into the remake trilogy, I'd say the best look at some of the areas of Final Fantasy VII in third person would be here in this game. But I also have to note that the areas of Rebirth do not have to be identical to Crisis Core, as Sector 8 in Crisis Core is very different to how it is depicted in Remake. Alright, now, I believe we could, / probably should, see a rural area with several farmland homes spread across the unplayable landscape, providing a beautiful countryside backdrop. There's got to be farms that grow those greens and other foods to supply Midgar and maybe even the rest of the world, seeing how it is the only farm on the original world map. Alright. I'm expecting some small villages with shops and some restaurants, some good old-fashioned country living. Now, I'm not saying that they will be playable areas, but rather, at the very least, off in the distance. Just remember, the Chocobo Farm takes up pretty much all of the east side of the continent. I just don't see how it could consist of one tiny little Chocobo Farm. I'd be okay with even just a verbal or fun Easter egg reference to a larger countryside town a few miles from the farm. A good friend of the show and author of the Norse myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII, M.J. Gallagher, suggested on Facebook that the Chocobo Farm is comparable to a real-life ostrich farm. To give you a real-life reference to feed your mind's eye of how the Chocobo Farm could look like, well, hey, here you go. I searched for ostrich farms that could have inspired the original and or inspire the expanded farm and what that will look like in Rebirth. And since development is in Japan, the first search was Japan, and I found Ishioka Ostrich Kingdom, and that's what that was right there. Now let's talk about how the story could change and be a little different in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I have predicted that Rebirth will lead us up to the Forgotten City. I know, this is ambitious thinking, but if this is the case, well, I'd almost certainly wager that Chocobo breeding will be in Rebirth to fill in some of the side quests and exploration opportunities, but that's exactly what I want Chocobo breeding in Rebirth for. Exploration opportunities. The previous video was about the Healan Lodge, which will be known as Cliff Resort in Rebirth. Cliffs are difficult to navigate on foot, and I mentioned that in that video that possibly the bridge is under maintenance or just simply broken, meaning the party will not be able to reach the resort unless they have a mountain chocobo. So with that being said, you can start to see how the large open areas of Rebirth become thrilling to travel. Imagine seeing the resort on the way to the farm, but not able to reach it and making a note that you'll have to revisit that later on. I love that in games. A sense of gated exploration, something the original Final Fantasy VII did pretty well. And in fact, I guess all Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy games did quite well. Alright, so now, what could happen story-wise at the Chocobo Farm? Well, in the original, you meet Choco Bill and his grandson, Choco Billy, and his granddaughter, Chol. Slight intermission spoiler warning. Choco Bill gives the party a ride to Calm at the end of intermission, so the party will have already met him. That maybe won't change the interaction between them much, but it is something to point out as it is a slight change up from the original. This is where Choco Bill tells the party they'll need chocobos if they want to cross the marshes to quickly get past the Midgar Zalem. Now I keep circling back to chocobo breeding, but it becomes even more fun when you think about customizing each of your party members' chocobos with unique saddles and headgear and what colored bird they ride. I just really hope this is a thing in Rebirth. Okay, back to story time. The whole point of the farm is to teach you how to catch a chocobo. Choco Billy sells you chocobo lure materia and some greens. Chol actually fills you in a bit on their situation. She comments on how expensive the lure was, the chocobo lure was, and says it's been like that since their parents died. I think Rebirth will give us a little bit more on that, giving the family more depth and really make us empathize with what they are going through emotionally and financially. Now, it might not all happen at the first time you meet them, but I mean, hey, let's see. Chocobo Bill was kind enough to drive the party to calm, and you can tell he's a kind-hearted and respectful person. He even says ma'am to Tifa. I just keep thinking about Billy and Chol's parents and how it would be a simple and interesting addition. They could have been soldiers in the Wutai War, and it's not really known how long ago they died, but how harsh would it be if they told the party that their parents died in the recent reactor bombing? Ooh, I don't know, guys. It's probably unnecessary to lay something that heavy on them at this point in the story. So it's just me brainstorming. But anyways, discovering how their parents died could be a nice addition, even if it's included later on in Rebirth, or even in part 3 when it's time to return and get that gold chocobo. But wait, there's more juice for you. I wouldn't just give you speculation. Let's talk about something pretty interesting here. In the Ultimania, on page 276 of the Material Ultimania English translated edition, it is revealed that the huntsman is the 4th son of a provincial livestock farmer. I would say he is the son of Choco Bill and uncle to the grandkids on the farm. The Ultimania says, quote, "What gritty past hides beyond that steely exterior? Well, it's quite a tale," end quote. So an explanation of how he became the man he is when he faces off with Cloud just before he jumps onto the getaway train. That would be awesome to get an explanation on that. If the huntsman witnessed his brother die on the Wutai battlefield, it could strengthen his resolve in Shinra and fuel his animosity enough to modify his equipment to be more lethal. Perhaps we will face off against him again in Rebirth, and the place that would make the most sense would be near the Chocobo Farm, possibly visiting his father and his niece and nephew. I'm sure he would want to protect them from Cloud and crew, especially since he will recognize Cloud as a terrorist. Maybe a change of heart once his eyes are open to what Shinra is really about, or maybe he's just a rotten egg, pun. Sorry, chocobo eggs, chocobo egg. Even his family doesn't want to associate him with, maybe that's how it is. But either way, I think we'll see the huntsman again and possibly a little bit more on this huntsman's backstory, because it seems like they were very interested in it. When he says that, hey, it's quite the tale, but we didn't have time to include it. So, and he's the unbreakable. I mean, they've given this guy a whole section in the Ultimania. There's got to be more to him, and I think it's that he's the son of Choco Bill. Okay. Now, first of all, this has to happen in Rebirth. This has to happen. Yeah, Yeah, that has to happen. All right. You can imagine that being in... Let's go back to it one more time. You can imagine this being elaborated on with a whole side quest dedicated to teaching how the Chocobos dance and the choreography, teaching them dance choreography, or a fun mini game with button prompts similar to the dance at Honeybee Inn in Remake. I'd be happy if they kept it simple too. After all, doing this does give you the summon Choco-Mog in the original, but you're already given that in Remake, so maybe some other reward. It's also worth noting that there were several posters around Midgar for the Chocobo show, which could explain why the Chocobos know this dance in the first place. Maybe you need to get them prepared for the Chocobo show. All right, now let's talk about Chocobo breeding in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. One of the main reasons to visit the farm is Chocobo breeding in the original. I think it will be implemented, as I said earlier, in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Well, the mobile-only Battle Royale Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier has recently been released, and within that game is a mini Chocobo farm that exists within Midgar during its construction. This may have given us a glimpse at what we can expect the experience to be in Rebirth's Chocobo farm, including Chocobo breeding. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Chocobo breeding didn't come into play until after you obtain the Highwind, but I actually foresee the Chocobo breeding being available at the first visit. This will hinge mostly on how far Rebirth takes us. First Soldier also showed us a variety of greens and nuts that can be used to feed them and have them mate with, which makes a ton of sense because I too like to have a salad and a nut when doing the nasty. These greens are what boosts the stats found in First Soldier's Chocobo's stamina, which depletes with every jump or drain with gliding attack. You can deal damage to enemies with heavy kicks from the steed. This harkens back to our idea of mounted Chocobo combat in Rebirth, which we will revisit in the upcoming video, Midgar Zalem. Speed, how fast it can run. HP, this gives the bird a health bar, which could come into play in Rebirth's open area, because this just may be me, but I'd love to see permadeath. You know, maybe in hard mode that unlocks after beating the game, I don't know. That bond between your Chocobo would be even greater, and this would encourage players to breed their Chocobos. Permadeath, imagine! So cool. The last stat being jump, being how high and how far they can jump. These 5 stats differ from the original, as they had only in the original, they had only a couple visible stats and a few hidden ones. Main stats being speed, stamina, intelligence. First Soldier introduces the possibility of Chocobo traits finding its way into Rebirth as well. Chocobo traits are unique passive abilities that the Chocobos can have. The First Soldier, each bird has 2, some examples being, to heal upon mounting and being able to scout treasure chests. And so trying to imagine Rebirth with its large open areas, having these traits. I'm sorry, I got thrown off here with these birds getting busy on the screen. It threw me off. All right, catching Chocobos and mounted combat in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Let's talk about that for a moment, shall we? Let's do it. Its surrounding area is where you catch them. How will that combat system work in Rebirth? I'm imagining throwing a green for the wild Chocobo to feast upon during battle. With the action-focused style of Remake Trilogy, there would be an added challenge of avoiding them while fighting other enemies. I mean, that would be kind of neat to have a little taming minigame to try jumping on and settling it down, sort of like in Breath of the Wild, The Legend of Zelda. Will we see mounted Chocobo back battles? I mentioned earlier how First Soldier had this, but I'd prefer more than just kicks from the Chocobo, but mounted combat unique to the character. Cloud swings his sword from side to side. Barrett shoots while riding. Tifa could have the Chocobo kick like in First Soldier, but maybe she could stand on the saddle and then just drop kick an enemy. Aerith buff the speed and other stats of the Chocobos? You get the idea. Wait. Does Red 13 ride a Chocobo? Forget Sephiroth endgame and what will become of the planet. This is the real question we need answers to. Does Red 13 ride a Chocobo? And also, guess what? I know I've planted it in your mind already. The seed is planted. Barret on a Chocobo? Barret on a Chocobo. You know John Eric Finley is going to kill it with that with singing the Chocobo theme. You know it's going to happen. And I'm excited already. He'll do a much better job than I did. All right, right there. We'll stop it right there because Cloud, I couldn't agree with you more. Okay, Cloud, I am getting the feeling that I'm forgetting something. I worked on this script for a while, and I still feel like I could add more. But there you go. This has been the Chocobo Farm in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, as you can see, just like Cloud saying, maybe I forgot something, maybe I'm not thinking of something, so this is where you guys come in. Go ahead and comment and let me know what you guys think and what you hope for at the Chocobo Farm. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And be sure to tune in next time when we continue this series. This series used to be called the What to Expect in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, which we're now changing. I'm going to change the name. I haven't really thought of what I'm going to change the name to. It could be Final Forecast 7 to kind of go off of our final podcast, and maybe like Final Forecast 7, Final Forecast 16, and then anything like predictions and based and stuff like that could fall under those kind of series. Final Forecast. If not, I might just go back to What to Expect in Rebirth, or maybe just this. Maybe just this. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, enter title. Anyway, that should be enough stalling to allow those videos to appear on your screen and for you to hit that subscribe button. So I think I'm going to see myself out. This has been the Warrior of Hype. Thank you for watching.